Welcome in. It is Big Ten today on a Wednesday. We are presented by Gatorade. Thrilled to have you with us. Dave Revson, very pleased to be joined as I am every Wednesday by my good friend Ashley Adamson. Ashley, I do not know about you, but the college football playoff rankings that came out last night kind of confirmed my worldview. The Big Ten with four of the top five teams. That worldview may have just a smidgen of bias. Just a little bit, but man, it was pretty to see.
You know, hang it in the Louvre, Dave. Like November 13th CFP rankings, just it's a thing of beauty. And I mean, I'm with you. Like we knew there was going to be movement with Miami and Georgia both losing last weekend. And the committee, I mean, obviously they heard your pontificating on Saturday and they did not put the Bulldogs above Indiana. In fact, you have so much pull, they fall all the way to number 12. So way to go.
I will take full credit for that. I know the committee, ultimately the last decision-making process, and I don't think it's actually on their sheet, but I think we all know the last thing they do.
Phone a friend, Dave Revson.
Yeah, or they just watch the final drive. Like, what else are you going to do, right? You watch the final drive, you see what we had to say, and you adjust accordingly. The CFP rankings are a big story. Four of the top five, as I said, come from the Big Ten. It's the first time any conference has ever pulled that off. Now, remember, the top four seeds go to conference champs, so by definition, just one from each league. So even though the Big Ten has four of the five teams, it doesn't have four of the top five seeds. Oregon remains the top seed. The Ducks would get a bye. The other three would host home games, with Ohio State taking on Boise State, Penn State welcoming Ole Miss, and Alabama journeying to Bloomington to battle the Hoosiers. Please, please make that happen. We both thought Indiana was underrated last week. Ashley, they move up significantly in the rankings this week. You like where the Hoosiers are this week?
I love it. I love it. I mean, just, you know, you said it, like Indiana hosting Alabama in the college football playoff. Just the fact that we can say that sentence out loud as a real world possibility in week 12 just makes me smile. But I want to underscore what you mentioned off the top, Dave. Like this is the first time in CFP history that one league has had four teams ranked in the top five in the same week. First time ever. So again, I know there are no banners hung for a November CFP ranking, but it's cool to see that representation. And I imagine, you know, Commissioner Petiti had a big smile on his face last night when they came out. But for IU, like they put themselves in great position. You've got a bye to prepare for what will likely be one of the biggest games in program history next week in Columbus. And of course, if you're an IU fan, you want them to go out there, pull the upset, leave no doubt. But even I think, Dave, with a close loss, if they have a great showing, they're going to be fine. They're sitting in the top five right now, and they'd theoretically be 11-1 with their only loss on the road against the number 2 team. The big concern, obviously, is like their lack of top 25 wins and the fact that they'd probably be in some head-to-head debates with 2-loss SEC teams that do have some good wins on their resume. But I don't even want to go down that path because we don't need to put the cart in front of the horse. Hoosier fans, on November 13th, you are 10-0 for the first time ever. You are ranked in the top 5 in the CFP for the first time ever. So I just hope that they are all soaking this in and enjoying it because it's a moment in time. And I think that, you know, they're going to be talking about this 2024 season for years to come. And Dave, even though the last thing I'll say that the, you know, performance against Michigan last week wasn't the best that we have seen from Curt Cignetti's group, they found a way. And at this time of year, as the pressure continues to mount and the games get bigger, that is all that really matters. So I love seeing the Hoosiers at number 5, and they've got everything in front of them.
And we cannot hold them to a different standard than other teams are held to. I mean, all of these teams have had games where at times they have underperformed. I mean, let's even just look at some of the Big Ten teams that are in the rankings. I mean, Ohio State was in a huge down-to-the-wire battle with Nebraska, and Indiana pummeled Nebraska. So kind of on a week-to-week basis, you don't always know exactly what you're going to get. But to your point, you win the game, and that's what matters. And I agree with you now that Indiana does have a bit of a buffer zone. So kind of regardless, I think, of what happens against Ohio State, as long as it's a reasonable and competitive game, I think you still see Indiana hanging around in those rankings. The one thing I would say about IU, and this isn't in any way to diminish Penn State, because I thought Penn State played as well as we've seen them play all year in that game against Washington. And you get into the comparing scores, and Penn State was much better against Washington than Indiana was against Washington. Indiana had a backup quarterback in that game. But I guess it's just a long way of saying, like, I think you could make an argument for Indiana ahead of Penn State. I think you're rewarding Penn State for kind of the close game that they played against Ohio State. They've kind of shown how they match up against top teams, which isn't an opportunity that Indiana's had. But again, like I think all of these Big Ten teams have been treated well. Again, can you quibble about one place here or there? Maybe. But I think they've all strengthened their case. I would certainly make an argument that Penn State looked a lot stronger last week than they had in previous weeks, and we saw that by them moving up.
Yeah, and the other thing to add on to that with Penn State, like it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for Penn State to finish 11-1, miss out on the Big Ten championship, and sit back and have some extra time, to prepare for a first-round playoff game that you get to host. I know this is all going to change, but just for the sake of argument, you look at their path. If the season ended today and Penn State, as you showed, they would host Ole Miss at Beaver Stadium, then play BYU. Like, given how close the Nittany Lions have been to making a playoff and having never made one, they are in a terrific position right now. And not going to Indy in some weird way may not end up being the worst thing. And I think, Dave, to me, that's what's interesting. We don't know a lot yet in this new playoff format, how it's all going to come together. But getting in with one loss and not playing in your conference championship, I think we will see some teams in that exact position that will make a run in this new format. I mean, we saw it in the 14 playoff. Alabama in 2017 won it all after not playing in the SEC championship. So that's what's, I think, fun about, not only are there so many more teams in the mix right now and all the people that thought that this was going to dilute the regular season, like I think it's just made this month of November even so much richer because we get to talk about so many more teams that are still in contention. But that's what's fun about this new format. There are going to be things that we aren't even thinking about right now that we'll look back and realize, you know what? Maybe it's not the end of the world to have one loss and go host a first round game in the playoff.
I'm with you on it's going to be really interesting to see how the loser of conference championship games is treated because there is an accomplishment to getting there. To your point, Penn State needs a ton of help to get to the Big Ten championship game, right? They need a little bit of chaos because they've got that head-to-head loss against Ohio State. So Ohio State is ahead of them in the pecking order, and then we're Indiana to beat Ohio State. Kind of how does all that figure in? Indiana would be undefeated, so then all they'd have to do would be to beat Purdue, and they'd be in. So assuming Oregon doesn't lose, then Indiana, Oregon, obviously those two control their own destiny. So Penn State needs a lot of things to happen to have a shot. But to your point, I think you can make an argument that maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. What about the Buckeyes in there at number 2? It feels to me like, again, they're getting a ton of respect for the way that they played Oregon, the way that they played Penn State, obviously the close loss to Oregon, the win on the road, hostile atmosphere, Penn State. It feels like, again, Ohio State, I mean, you certainly can't complain about where they are. They're not going to be number 1 because they lost to number 1. So number 2 feels like the ideal spot for them.
Yeah, I think they're in a great position. And it's just a reminder, and we all do this every week, Dave, and I think football fans, that's what makes them fanatics. You have something happen like the Oregon loss and then followed by a win over Nebraska that nobody really felt good about. And it felt like the sky was falling in Columbus. And now here you are, and you're in an unbelievable position. You're ranked number 2. You look at who you've got left. You've got Northwestern at Wrigley on Big Ten Network this weekend. You've got that Indiana game we were talking about, and then Michigan. It's the hardest of any of the top 4 teams in the Big Ten in terms of remaining schedule. But they are right where, they need to be, I think. And ultimately, given all the pressure that you and I have talked about a lot that makes this season unique for the Buckeyes, they have found a way, I think, especially from that Oregon and Nebraska, those back-to-back weeks, I feel like they are just ascending. And Ryan Day talked about that they completely revamped the defense, and they've changed some different things. And I think it's the same way that I feel about Oregon. One of the best ways to evaluate a season is how much has a team improved over the course of 12 games. And, Dave, just to spin it forward to the Ducks, like I look at their offensive line as the great microcosm of this. They struggled mightily in their first 2 games. They were just named this week a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award, which goes to the best O-line in the nation. And that is the type of team that Dan Lanning has built. Like, they've had great offensive lines there before. Mario Cristobal, brought in a bunch of big-time talent during his time in Eugene. But I think given how they started the season, with all the sacks they were giving up, and how they evolved with that group, despite some injuries as of late, it's a big reason why Oregon is ranked number 1 undefeated, and also why Dylan Gabriel is a Heisman favorite. So that's, to me, I look at Oregon and Ohio State sitting there at 1 and 2, and it is about, they're on a collision course to meet again in Indianapolis and maybe again in the playoff for a third time this season. But I just think it's about how you evolve over the course of a season, and both of those teams have continued to take steps forward. Even given that the Ducks did not have their best game last week, they were still able to win, even when they're not at their best.
I do think that Oregon is among the most improved teams in the league. I mean, it'd be tough to argue UCLA isn't up there. They're getting dramatically better, as we've seen. But yes, I mean, we were in full-blown panic mode after those first 2 games against Idaho and Boise State. Again, in hindsight, Boise State is really good and ultimately might end up in the college football playoff. And we'll probably have the Doak Walker Award winner who might end up winning the Heisman. So, again, the part of the challenge of college football is you don't know what you don't know. And early on in the year, it's hard to really gauge. But Idaho is a team that they should have handled much more easily than they did. And now you think about kind of where we are, as you said, particularly with that offensive line, how much better that group has gotten here. And it is a testament to teams improve. Teams get better over the course of the year. I think Oregon waltzes into the Big Ten championship game. I don't want to sit here and jinx them. I think Wisconsin's, again, Camp Randall's a tough place to play. And Wisconsin is certainly capable of pulling off that upset, but it just feels like they're still figuring a lot of stuff out. And then I just don't see, with a bye week and all the excitement around this team and how good they are, I just don't see them losing at home to Washington, given how much Washington has struggled. I know it's a conference game, but away from home, Washington is very different than Washington at Husky Stadium. So I think Oregon's clearly in the best spot here. I think they have the easiest road ahead of them. And to your point, I think they've proven a ton to this point.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dave. I'd co-sign on all that. And I think what's interesting about that Washington game, and we mentioned it on Saturday night as kind of the closing thought, but I look at that Washington game against Oregon and I look at Michigan, Ohio State. Michigan and Washington have a chance to, that will be their Super Bowls, like that game and their rivalry game. Can they go spoil something for the team that they most want to beat on any given season? So they, of course, will be dialed in and up for the challenge, and all the pressure will be on Oregon and Ohio State in those final regular season games. But I think particularly with the Ducks, Dan Lanning has never beat Washington. He was the Huskies were a thorn in their side the last couple of years, and especially in that Pac-12 championship game last year. Like that, there is all of the additional motivation. I am sure he's going to have whatever edge that he always does, whatever theme he always comes up for the week. It's going to be, as good as it's ever been on that final regular season game. So yeah, but like I said, we should frame this and hang it on the wall in your office, because it looks pretty darn good with 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5 right now.
Yeah, we'll request 2 copies, one for each one of us, just so we have access to it. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Oregon will have a ton of incentive in that Washington game, given the 2 games last year that kept them out of the college football playoff.